It was February 2002. It was a miserable and depressing winter, the kind of freezing hellscape that only early 2000s Eastern Europe could offer. I was about 9 years old, and after having beaten Max Payne 1 twice with absolutely no parental supervision, I was out of games to play. Until one day, I was rummaging through my uncle's collection and I found a burned CD of Giant Citizen Kabuto. I rushed home, installed it on my dingy-ass computer, and I was so unimpressed with it. Nothing made sense, the monsters looked lame, the shooting felt weak. Of course, back then I wasn't capable of articulating these opinions, but that's certainly how I remember feeling. And then...
Look, I'm trying to find a mate of mine, he's missing on... What the f*** is that?
What? I was hooked. Giant Citizen Kabuto is a 2000 action-adventure game developed by Planet Moon Studios. The studio was founded by ex-Shiny Entertainment developers Nick Brody and Bob Stevenson, who were then known as the team behind the cult classic MDK. They were joined by software engineers Scott Guest and Tim Williams, who also worked on MDK. The game looked very different in its early stages of development. Nick Brody, Bob Stevenson, and Tim Williams wanted to make a multiplayer game with spacemen, pirates, and monsters. Giants was supposed to drop in 1999, but the game suffered delays mainly due to Andy Astor's illness, who was then the chief programmer of the game. The game went through several technical changes, which included upsizing the graphic textures and making the graphical software compatible with Nvidia graphics cards, and was released in December 2000. Also, fun fact, the soundtrack was composed by Jeremy Soule. Yes, that Jeremy Soule. Oh, and Mark Snow was involved. Who is Mark Snow, you ask? Nobody. Just the guy who composed the theme music for an obscure show called The X-Files. I'm sure you've never heard of it. Giants was praised for its gameplay and humor, but like many games covered on this channel, it soon faded into obscurity. Well, kinda. You see, this game has a very strong cult following and a passionate fanbase. If you want to play this game on modern systems, I highly suggest grabbing the unofficial 1.5 patch from the Giants Discord community. It's made by only one guy and he's hard at work on the next version. I'll get back to the Discord server later. Alright, let's jump into the game.
No! I won't let you!
In Giant Citizen Kabuto, players take on the roles of three humanoid races. The Meccarans, a trigger-happy race of British-sounding imperialists, a magic-wielding Sea Reaper, and the Kabuto, a kaiju-like being who probably went through a wrestling phase until they realized smashing shit is a more viable career path. First, I want to talk about the presentation. I don't know how to put this, but the game looks... not good. Believe it or not, back in the day, this game was praised for its state-of-the-art graphics. It was even used for screenshots to sell graphics cards. Sadly, because the graphics are not stylized like at all, the game hasn't aged as well as something like 13. Terrain textures are low quality, like they've been compressed through a black hole. The winter and aquatic levels look like David Fincher had a stroke. Rotating the camera while standing against walls causes weird graphical glitches. It's certainly not a looker. It's not all bad though. Character models are very detailed and imaginative. There are some nice weather effects, the sky looks pretty sometimes. Depending on when you activate the focus character feature, you can see the Kabuto roar from multiple angles. Speaking of the Kabuto, your hatchlings will snatch the prey out of your hands if you don't eat it fast enough, which was a very nice detail. Giants is filled with these small details that make up for its graphical limitations. Like how Smarties will pester you if you spend too much time fucking around instead of dropping them in a safe spot. Entering a Smartie pub will cause them to stop and stare at you. Tree branches sway in the wind. There's a decent amount of wildlife. The beaches actually don't look that bad. And the particle effects are surprisingly advanced for a game released in 2000. I also love how you slide down hills. It's a totally unnecessary detail, but it's there. I know I just shat on the game for looking bad, but the more time I spent on this tropical planet, the more I vibed with it. It really is beautiful in its own way. There's something about this world that absorbed me completely. I'm far from being a nostalgic guy, but it took me back to 20 years ago when I was just a kid at school, anxious to get home and play a couple of hours of Giants. But what did pass the test of time are the writing and the humor. Giants is an extremely funny game. It's worth mentioning that unlike, say, Jazz Punk, which conveys its humor through the gameplay, Giants does so via cutscenes. Let's watch a few snippets.
You lads mind helping me rescue Timmy? For I'm just an old man, plus me balls are saggy.
Yeah, sure. Hold it, Laszlo. Come on, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, get your beating asses in gear.
Bloody hell. You've lost weight. You idiot.
Come on, give me a hand, Reg.
What the?
It's called a pop-up bomb, and I've made it extra light, so you'll be able to move around easily with it attached to your back.
Cheers, mate. So, what's going on here then?
Oh, it's the monthly sacrifice to Kabuto.
Sounds painful. So who's the unlucky blighter?
Some kid called Timmy.
Timmy, you say? Oh, listen, mate. Do us a favour. Hold this a moment, will you?
Oh, yeah.
Timmy!
Timmy? Timmy!
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 Where do I even start, man? These cutscenes have no right to be as good as they are. You know how many AAA games use that shot reverse shot thing? Well, Giants' cutscenes have some actual cinematography put into them. Look, I'm no filmmaker, but I couldn't help but notice some Edgar Wright style direction with fast cuts and humorous transitions. The comedy is conveyed as much through the writing as it is through the direction. I just wish they found a way to inject some of the comedy into the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, Giants is a balls to the wall power fantasy, but that's about it. Also, I think we can all agree that the comedy takes a backseat role in the second half of the game and then completely disappears once the Kabuto campaign kicks off. In fact, the Kabuto campaign has no cutscenes between missions at all, which is a real shame. I would have loved to see some Buster Keaton style slapstick comedy featuring the Kabuto. Oh well, maybe we'll get to see that in a sequel. Oh, I heard Nick Broody himself started a Kickstarter campaign for developing a spiritual successor to Giants. First Wonder, I think it was called. Wonder how that's going. Now, the reason why Giants has garnered such a strong cult following over the years, apart from the cutscenes and the humor, is the gameplay. This game was ahead of its time in so many ways. The sequential pacing that has the game gently introducing new mechanics as players advance through the story, the way it blends multiple genres sometimes in the same mission, the mechanically distinct but narratively interconnected campaigns. There's a lot to talk about here, so for the sake of giving this monstrosity of a video coherent structure, I'm gonna talk about each campaign separately. So let's start with the mechs.
Ah! Reggie, I hear you're quite the man about toon.
Well, you know, trying to get myself a little taste now and then.
Ah, what's me, you dirty wee bastard!
So the game starts with a party of British mechs crash landing on a tropical planet. You assume the role of Baz, the leader of the group and overall the most British character in video game history, as evidenced by the fact that the first thing he does after ending up on a strange planet is to plant a flag.
Do you have a flag?
What led up to the unfortunate event is strangely relatable. They were on their way to planet Majorca to enjoy some sunshine and beer. This planet is frequently referenced throughout the game whenever the mechs have to deal with something that they would rather not have dealt with. Don't quote me on this, but I strongly suspect it's a nod to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where Fort Prefect is yearning for a vacation on the planet Eroticon 6, only to be constantly kept back by events out of his control. Anyway, so the premise is simple: pick up your friends and get the fuck out. However, our group of British mechs quickly find themselves drawn into a sort of revolutionary war between the idiotic Smarty population and their equally idiotic oppressors, the Sea Reapers.
Wait! She deserved it!
With seemingly nothing else better to do, the mechs decide to put their vacation plans on hold and help the space hobbits defeat the space fish people. And the missions will have you do just that, gliding through large open maps, destroying bases, and gradually building up your forces for the final confrontation against the Reapers. What struck me about the Mecc campaign is how well paced it is. The game starts off as your basic third-person shooter with some light exploration elements. You got your guns, you got your third-person perspective, your enemies to shoot at from said perspective, an objective to complete, and yeah, pretty standard stuff. But once the second mission kicks off, the game begins introducing new gameplay mechanics gradually. This causes the game to stray further and further away from average conventions for the genre, morphing the title into this weird hybrid which works surprisingly well. And the best part about it is that nothing feels shoehorned in. For instance, after saving the first mech, the game introduces tactical squad elements. Nothing fancy, it basically amounts to ordering your mechs to attack and defend positions, but it spices up things quite nicely. The next mission has you tackle these large canyons defended by snipers and artillery pieces that can kill you in one shot, so the game gives you a cloaking device to move around safely. This is also when players have to hold back their impulse to cause mayhem and start thinking tactically. So basically you'll be doing stuff like providing suppressive fire while your buddies are charging the enemy lines, sneaking around, feeding the crowds from a distance with your sniper rifle, using the terrain to your advantage, retreating to resupply at shops, looking for blind spots so you can safely destroy turrets, and others. I don't know, I'm not a fucking tactician. It's incredible how quickly the flow of the gameplay becomes almost second nature. Add a decent variety of weapons and consumables and Giants puts many modern third-person shooters to shame. And then, as soon as you start feeling a little bored, Giants suddenly introduces RTS and base building elements. Again, don't expect anything fancy, this is not Company of Heroes or World in Conflict, and it's not meant to be really. You can't change the placement of buildings, nor upgrade them. All you do is recruit Smarties to work on your base and hunt wildlife to gather food for them. Also, while building buildings out of sequence is possible, the progression is linear and it always leads up to the same point. But what makes this section so appealing is how well it's integrated. It doesn't feel like something they just tacked on for the sake of adding a little variety to the game. No, it feels like everything led up to this point. Like this is the actual game in its final form, this RTS shooter hybrid that, on top of everything else, also has some light tower defense elements. That's why I didn't go through my usual routine and talk about how the shooting feels, for example, because it's just one component out of many. What's more, when looking through my footage, I realized that some of the objectives from the early game foreshadowed gameplay mechanics that were to be introduced later in the campaign. For example, the first mission tasks you with saving a group of Smarties and dropping them in a fixed location, what the game calls a Smartie pad. Later, when recruiting Smarties to build my base, I picked them up and dropped them in the Smartie pad without even giving it a second thought. It blew my mind. If this isn't genius game design, I don't know what is. And you know what's funny? The entire Mecc campaign is just a 6 or so hour long prelude. I'd go as far as to say it's a tutorial for the Sea Reaper campaign, which plays so differently it may as well be a different game.
I've been meaning to tell you this for many years now.
Oh my God.
Yes, it's true. I am your father.
No, don't say it!
But I must. I am...
Wait!
Your father.
Many people consider the second campaign to be the high point of the game. While I mostly agree with that, I also think this is when the game experiences a slight drop in quality, for reasons I'll address later. Let's start with the positives though. In the second campaign you play as Delphi, the daughter of the evil Reaper Queen. Unlike her mother, a genocidal maniac who wants to wipe the Smarties off the face of the earth, or Some reason Delphi wants to put an end to the Great Smarty Purge, and that's it, I think. She just doesn't want to see the Smarties killed. Look, just because she leads a revolution doesn't mean she has to have some grand plan. Don't judge her, okay? You try running a revolution from your couches listening to your 21 Savages and watching your star. Delphi plays very differently than the Meccs. For one, she is an absolute force of nature. Like, literally. Unlike the Meccs, who can only regenerate health with pickups and items, Delphi can do so by swimming in deep waters. On top of that, piranhas don't attack her, so every time she's in danger of dying, she can just retreat to the nearest water pool. But that's not even the best part. Delphi can jump across extreme distances with a speed and grace that puts Baz's jetpack to shame. I can't overstate the degree to which this ability changes the flow of the gameplay, for better and for worse, but mostly the former. The turbo boost, as the game calls it, feels great even after all these years. The sense of speed and momentum that you get when swooping across the map is just incredible. I don't really have the technical know-how to explain why, but I think it's safe to assume that it's a testament to the talent of the team that worked on the animations. Unlike the Meccs, who packed all sorts of weapons, Delphi has a wide assortment of spells and arrow types for her bow, as well as a sword. I gotta be honest, I haven't used the spells that much because by the time I realized I had them, I had already massacred generations worth of Reapers with my sword, but just so you know, the options there. The turbo boost combined with Delphi's versatile arsenal of spells and arrow types resulted in some of the most explosive, over-the-top, blood-pumping action spectacles that I have ever partaken in. Blinking from one enemy to the next and eviscerating them with my sword, ambushing groups of Reapers from across the map is just pure, unadulterated joy. As Delphi, you have to engage in several base building missions as well. Mechanically speaking, they play the same. You recruit Smarties, drop them off in your base, and you put them to work. There's one small and creepy difference. Smarties consume souls instead of Vem meat, so you're not forced to survey the map for packs of roaming wild animals. All enemies are fair game. Now, as much as I enjoyed the base building, the Delphi campaign is when it starts losing its luster. All missions play out in the same sequence. Go out, recruit Smarties, drop them off, put them to work, and build all the structures until the game unlocks the spell which will allow you to destroy the main object. The most tedious part is gathering all the Smarties. The levels are huge and Smartie villages are not marked on the map, so you have to poke around a lot, leaving your base vulnerable to attacks. What's more, there's no option to mass kidnap them. You have to pick the Smarties up and transport them to your base, one by one. And considering the sheer size of some maps, it gets very tedious very fast, even with Delphi's turbo boost. One thing that I forgot to mention is the lack of an in-game save feature. Usually dying leads to a complete restart. But, to the game's credit, in the base building sections, the game autosaves after each building is constructed. But there's a catch here. Each time you die, the builders are reset. So I hope you like traversing the map's treacherous geography looking for those annoying fuckers, cause you will be doing a lot of that. Now I have to point out that I'm making things sound more negative than they actually are. These flaws were here before and they didn't affect my enjoyment of the game. It's just that during the Delphi campaign they become more and more apparent. The thing is, the developers seem to be very aware of these glaring design issues. Just when I was about to get tired of base building, the game dropped not one but 3 racing missions, one after another, out of nowhere. Yes, racing missions, with jet skis and rockets and shit. And they're fun and fluid, and they have no right to be as good as they are. It's like they had this sixth sense for knowing exactly when players were more likely to get bored with the game and when to shake things up. Many current games could learn a lot from Giants when it comes to pacing. So that concludes the Delphi section. But there is one more campaign left. Now this I like. The third and final campaign of Giants puts you in the role of the eponymous Kabuto. The Kabuto is the only one of its race. The Reapers created him as their guardian, but soon found him beyond control. It's worth mentioning that you won't be playing as the Kabuto, rather a Kabuto which was created to stop the OG Kabuto. I know that sounds confusing, but trust me, the less I reveal about the story, the better. Now, as you might have expected, the Kabuto segment is nothing like the previous ones. It's designed to be a bombastic 4-hour-long victory lap where players are free to cause as much destruction as they want and settle old scores. Eat witches, throw reapers into turrets, turn buildings into rubble, crush your enemies with smoldering volcano rocks. Fuck jetpacks, fuck bows, fuck shops, fuck base building. You're a behemoth, a giant, a force of nature. You are the one who stomps. He has a bulldozer with a wrecking ball attached. He'll leave a ring around your eyes and tread marks on your backs. He's an animal, he's hungry. You ain't been hungry since Supreme Clientele. Wait. I sincerely can't remember the last time I had so much fun in a game. But there's more to the Kabuto campaign than kaiju antiques. What makes it so good is the way the progression is mapped out. You start out as a sort of adolescent Kabuto, and the game gradually gives you more abilities as you grow in size. You do so by eating Smarties. Don't worry, these are evil Smarties, so obviously they deserve to be eaten. The real fun begins once you reach maximum size. Now, throwing enemies will kill them instantly. You get an adrenaline bar that, when charged up, allows you to execute various wrestling moves to devastating effect. Oh, I almost forgot. At maximum size, the Kabuto can produce smaller dinosaur-like creatures who are just as deadly once fully grown up. Now, believe it or not, that's not all. See, the Kabuto might be a ferocious killing machine, but he's not invincible. Starting with the third mission, the game increases the number of enemies dramatically, so jumping straight into the line of fire is no longer an option. Instead, you'll have to do what us Kabuto military scholars call tactical maneuvering, which basically amounts to hitting the least defended Smarty villages, growing, and then going for the main objective. Yeah. Another big brain move that I love to use was kiting heavily armed reapers to Reaper barracks so that I had a constant source of sustenance while I was dealing with them. Fucking nailed that line. You'd think this would ruin the flow of the combat, but it doesn't. It works surprisingly well. In fact, this additional strategic layer is exactly what makes it click. Having to assess the situation and figure out the best tactical approach makes the destruction and mayhem you eventually cause all the more satisfying. Knowing that witches can shrink the Kabuto and burn him to a crisp will make you think twice before blindly charging into an army of reapers. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say about the Kabuto segment. It's a never-ending roller coaster of destruction and pure fun, and it comes exactly at the right moment. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the multiplayer. I'm gonna be honest with you, other than an hour of team deathmatch, I haven't played much of it. But even with the little I've played, I can safely declare that the multiplayer is an entirely different beast. Giant Citizen Kabuto was one of the earliest attempts at asymmetrical multiplayer. Think Evolve or Aliens vs Predator 2. Multiplayer mode allows for a maximum of 5 mechs, 3 Sea Reapers and 1 Kabuto. It also includes deathmatches and capture the flag type modes, and even base building if players decide to activate it. Now, as is the case with these old games, the multiplayer is dead. Or is it? Well, not quite. The multiplayer is being kept alive by the Giant Citizen Kabuto official fan community. If you want to try it out, I highly recommend joining their Discord. They organize weekly game nights, and as I've said earlier, they're constantly working on patches and fixes to improve and optimize the game. So I think that's it for this video. I urge you to give Giant Citizen Kabuto a shot. It holds up surprisingly well, and unlike other old games, it requires little to no fiddling to make it work. Giants was ahead of its time in so many ways. I just hope the attention it has gotten in the wake of its 20th anniversary will raise some interest in a spiritual successor of sorts. But until then, we will always have this game. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.